We are live. Hi, Rashida. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Grace. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I think you're a legend when it comes to career because, listening to your other podcast that you came from a single mother so your mom was a single mom, and then you had like no one, around you that kind of like was your role model, but you kind of like really built the path for yourself. So you were at IBM for over 20 years before joining Microsoft. Now you're the CVP of Microsoft. Why don't we talk about what were some early career lessons that you have learned early on in your career kind of shape you into who you are today?
Yeah, no, I think, and I'll just correct you. So, my mom wasn't a single mom. My dad was actually around, so I did have both my parents, but my parents
Oh,
were
I
my parents were teenage parents, and so
oh yeah, teenage parents. I'm so sorry. I
it's
was like,
It's
yeah,
okay. So they were
I
young,
understood.
trying to figure it out and trying to navigate life, all at the same time. And I think for me, when I think about my career, I think about um, the point from Robert Frost: two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by. I always get it wrong, but I've sort of looked at things from the perspective of don't be afraid to travel the road less traveled by,
Mhm.
even if there's not a GPS. Really growing up on a small island in the Caribbean, I knew that there was a bigger world that was out there and I wanted to
Mhm.
be able to explore it. And even though my parents were young, they really instilled in me the spirit of curiosity. And so I think for me, I always just said yes. I said yes to the things that I think most people would say no to. And because I didn't have a blueprint, there were no conversations at our dinner table when I was growing up on this is what you should do, this is the path you should take. And so I felt really like curiosity got me in the car and courage essentially
Mhm.
kept me pressing forward, sort of pressing the gas. And when I think about some of those like key moments for me in my career, I think about like when I worked at IBM and they offered me a role in China. I mean,
Mhm.
I knew nothing about China. I
Mhm.
think I didn't even leave the United States at that point, but I jumped in. I mean, the same was true when I was offered a role in Slovakia, as well when I was with IBM, or even when I was asked to take on a role in sales after being in engineering and operations management roles for a large part of my career. So I think that level of curiosity and saying yes,
Mhm.
um, I'll do it, I think was really important. I think I had to learn not to shy away from challenges, but even if I was scared, not to shy away from
Mhm.
them, right? That willingness to say yes, I think really was the growth engine, or really I think the real anchor of the growth engine of my career. I think the other thing when I think about my career, I would say is no one achieves anything alone. As I said, I didn't have, a blueprint. So I had to build, a support network. I had to find mentors. I had to learn how to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so I really realized early on that we all stand on the shoulders of giants,
Mhm.
right? Because in life, you're going to have setbacks.
Mhm.
But I think that those setbacks are the lessons and really the gifts that you have. And when you have a good support system, they help you with that. They help you to maneuver those setbacks, to learn from those setbacks, and I think most importantly, to recover from them. And I think maybe the last thing I would say in terms of like lessons in my career is, I also had to let go of this idea of being perfect. Like I had to be
Mhm.
perfect to belong. Particularly as a young, Black woman in tech, early on, and funny. I mean, I tried to like look older and dress more
Mhm.
corporate. I would wear like scarves and dark
Mhm.
suits and this whole thing,
Mhm.
just so, people would stop calling me kid or I
Mhm.
was underestimated. But, I think over time, I realized that my youth, my Caribbean roots, my perspective, that was actually my edge. And so
Mhm.
it's interesting because I mean, today people pay millions of dollars to preserve their youth, right? And
Mhm.
that was me trying to not be youthful. And, I can now just show up with mine for free, right? Courtesy of I like to call it my good genes and my island melanin. So I think the biggest unlock for me was really like owning my vibe, because we're often taught to be cookie cutter, like walk like this, talk like that. But I think truly like your vibe is your differentiator, and you got to take, your nuance, your rhythm, your edge, and you got to learn how to let it shine.
For sure. I feel like the corporate culture also changed a lot in the past like 20 years. I remember I was listening to your podcast. You basically mentioned that you would wear glasses to make yourself look older. I actually do the same, but not like older, but more like professional. I feel like I look downer with all the glasses. But so like I definitely also I was listening to your the other podcast that basically you were saying like having an accent or like correcting how you talk or how you dress, everything like how you present yourself like make people treat you differently. I find those are like great lessons as well. And coming from like another country, I was listening to your other podcast about like you were living in China. I feel like there's a lot like culture nuance and like just different um things that you have to like deal with. And I feel like you done it so like creatively, and it's just like you are really like treating different things with the lens of like experiment. Those are things I find really refreshing. And since like you are like right now on a lot of boards, I wanted to ask you like who is on your personal board of advisors, or how do you kind of build up your own mentor group since you came from a place that you didn't really have a blueprint? How do you kind of like uncover these different areas that you could go when you are shaping yourself, shaping your own career?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And it's funny. It's interesting. I was actually in London last
Mhm,
week, and I was doing a roundtable with with the team there. And I
mhm,
actually talked about my China experience, and
mhm,
because I was sharing with the team that I think it's always important to teach people, how to treat us. And I
mhm,
reflected on an experience I had in China where I was, walking for lunch, and there was this young girl that was looking at me. And you can tell when someone is like talking about you.
mhm,
And
mhm.
I said to my colleague, I said, can you tell me what the little girl is saying? And she said, Rashida, you don't want to know. And I said, I do. Tell me. I've got thick skin. I can handle it. And she said she's asking her mom, why are you so dirty? And I said to my colleague, Amy, I said, hey, can you like ask her to allow me to let her daughter touch my skin? And the mom said yes. And when the little girl came up to me, she literally went like this, like, because she thought, like, I don't know, dirt was going to go flying. And I saw the amazement in her eyes, like when like she did that and nothing happened. And then she started doing like this. And, I told my colleague, I said, translate to her that, we're the same. I'm just chocolate and she's vanilla. And, I think for me, I think it's always good in life to assume positive intent, but teaching people how to treat you. And I think sometimes, like, that can be hard or it could be
Mhm,
different based on our experiences. But I think it's something to lean into because in that experience, like, I wanted the first time she saw someone that looked like me, I wanted her to see someone that was kind. I wanted to
mhm,
see someone that was generous. I wanted her to see that I'm just like her. And so I didn't want my reaction to be like, oh my God, like, why do you think I'm dirty? I wanted to educate her in a very positive way that, I may look different, but there's so much commonality that we have. So, yes, that China experience is a very defining one for me. It's just living in China for that period of time, I think there's so much that I learned. I tell people a lot of times that, I was there for about a year, but it felt like I was there for 5 years. It just really accelerated, my learning and my perspective over time. So thanks for bringing that up, actually.
I find that experience was like, I totally hear what you're saying because like coming to America as an international student, I felt that basically like I feel like I do the I feel like it's like kind of like a very similar-ish experience because a lot of people who never seen people look like yourself and like, they actually just want to understand you. They just never seen it before. Then like, they I feel like a lot of people just like it's just like unknown, so like it's foreign to them. So when you actually did that, I feel like that's very kind of you, and then also very creative of you to like really dealing with it with grace. And speaking of, I guess, like building up your own like corporate career ladder, so you spent like 20 years at IBM, like you came in as a research program manager, and then you before you go to Microsoft you were like the global VP. And why don't we talk about like how do you pick the projects to work on, or like how do you kind of advance your career? Because a lot of people spend like years, like let's call it 10 years 20 years at a place, but maybe not many people make it to VP or like make it to like leadership position. I guess, how do you think, like what are some core things that about you that you kind of like helped you succeed in at a corporate?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I went into the China story without answering your personal board of advisors question, but we can come back to that because I think that relates to, how I look at, roles and
Mhm,
building career. And I think it's really grounded into that element that I mentioned to you around curiosity. There was
mhm,
just so much that I didn't know.
mhm,
That I always say, like, what's the worst that can actually happen? And so I think when I look at, my career, I think it's been defined by, what I mentioned earlier, like saying yes to the things that, most people say no to,
mhm,
sort of anchoring on this perspective of building depth, and breadth. Like in my experience at IBM, I started out in the PC company, moved over into servers, then I did, point of sale for retail store solutions. So I worked in hardware. I moved over into the software business, which sort of landed me in the data and AI space. Then I moved over into services, where I was, doing a lot of work, implementing solutions,
mhm,
for clients in a consulting capacity. And I like to call it that T-shaped scale. It really helped me in terms of like learning different parts of the business, having empathy for the different life cycle of, a company. Like, when you have an opportunity to sort of be in, operations, that gives you a different perspective in terms of what to think about, how to move the business, forward. When you are, in a position, where you own a quota, right, and have to be able to
mhm,
drive value for, a customer. There's a different thought process and a different muscle that you have to build when you're on the services side, and the sales team has already sold something to a customer, and then you have to bring that to life. There are also, again, different competencies and different, muscles that you have to bring to the forefront. So I think in my career, I've always been, keen on making sure that I anchor myself on building competencies and building skills, not really defining myself or my next move based on a title or a particular spot or place in the organization, but how can I bring, richness and perspective and depth to my skills, to my competencies? Because from my standpoint, I always wanted to be defined not
mhm,
by the badge that I wear, but the skill sets
mhm.
that I have. And I've had an opportunity to work for two fabulous companies, spending 20 years at IBM and now coming up on 5 years at Microsoft. And, I am so glad that I've made both those choices because it's really just allowed me to grow in so many ways. But I think that growth has also come with me anchoring on not the title that I have or what those companies call me, but making sure I lean into ensuring that I have industry skill sets, I have industry competitiveness, and that is all that keeping that as really the forefront in my decision making in terms of how I bring value to the team that I'm on, how I bring value to the customers, that I serve.
I totally agree with you. I want to just double click on a few key points that you mentioned. So one thing is about having that competency and having the industry specific like skill set and like perspective, richness and perspective, and then having the dips. Like I guess like how do you shape your content diet, or like how do you learn stuff? Or first of all, how do you identify what to learn? at each of the positions, since like you transition from, hardware to software to AI. I guess like how do you identify what were the core things that you have to be learning to suit yourself for the next role that you're going to take? And number two, it's like, how do you educate yourself on these things and then translate that into like a useful like work um skill that you could actually demonstrate on the balance sheet, on those like kind of proof points of your success of the career or the role?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, here's what I would say. I think that, a lot of times, we think we're going to know everything, or we think
Mhm.
that, here's a book that we're going to read, or the person that we're going to talk to that's going to tell us A to Z, that's going to allow us to hit it outside of the park. And I think that's not reality. And so I also, as I've maneuvered into different roles and even different companies, there's a comfort. I had to get comfortable being uncomfortable,
Mhm.
be able to say, okay, here is what I bring to the table, but then here is where I can learn, and being comfortable asking questions, saying that I, don't know, but also taking the time actually to learn. I remember when I typically whenever I take a new role, or even when I joined, Microsoft, 4.5 years ago, like, that first like 6 months, year in the role, like it's tough, right?
Mhm.
Because like there's so much to learn. You got to learn like who are your stakeholders, who are your customers, what are the expectations, what should your priorities be, how do you prioritize? And so I think, for me, I've always, whenever I take a new role, I say like the first 6 months, the first year is going to be hell on earth.
Mhm.
Because I know that there's just a muscle that I'm going to need to build. I'm going to need to build relationships. There's a lot that I'm not going to know. So I'm probably coming from a place where I would have been knocking it out of the park. And,
Mhm.
I'm going to now transition to a place where like I'm going to have to be curious. I'm going to have to learn. And so I think that mindset is super important. I think for me, it's more about the mindset and the approach, and having the agility and the adaptability to really learn. At Microsoft, we call it like, do you have a growth mindset? Are you a learner every single day? Or do you lead from the perspective of, here's all the things that I know, right? I mean, and I
Mhm.
look at like AI today. I mean, I was super fortunate to be a part of, AI, this AI revolution over the last 10 years, starting at IBM with the IBM Watson team, but it's been a continuous journey. I mean, the market, compute, the products, how we implement, the technology has changed dramatically over time. So if I've just ground myself on here's what I did,
Mhm.
10 years ago or 5 years ago, and I'm not continuously curious about learning and expanding my knowledge, quite frankly, even though I was, sort of part of those vision expanders 10 years ago, I wouldn't necessarily be keeping up today, just given the rate and pace of the technology, where so much has changed, and expectations of the technology, and expectations of, how we support customers in deploying the technology has certainly advanced.
For sure. I totally love what you said about it is a mindset. It is not just like one thing or two things that you learn, but every day setting up some time to like actually reflect and learn is very important. Even you are the expert in a category, but like, if you don't keep improve, like there's always just generally always new things to learn. So now you lead the customer success for Azure and Microsoft, focusing on helping clients reimagining their business outcomes with a market leading portfolio. Can you share your perspective on like the best approach to achieving customer success?
Yeah. Look, I love customer success. Like,
Mhm.
I think it's the best role on the planet. So if there's anyone listening and want to like be doing amazing things, like join customer success. But I think for me, Grace, like, I think customer success to me is also a mindset, right? Because it
Mhm.
starts with like, how do you create deep empathy to truly understand your customers' ambitions? Like, what are their pressure points? Like, what are their pain points? Because it's not just about selling technology or position in technology, but like, how do we help customers win with the technology that we have provided? So I think it's really, an intersection of
Mhm,
technology precision, like what the what is, but also like the business ambition. And I think both need to be true, right? Like we've got to bring both together for the customer so that they
mhm,
can truly be successful. And that's really how I try to guide my team from a customer success perspective as we look at the cloud and AI platform for Azure. And I tell the team like this means like we've got to show up with technical credibility, industry context, and look, we got to roll up our sleeves, right? Because from a technical side,
mhm,
I view success as, like, look, we've got to have deep understanding of our customers' architecture, their data estate, their security posture, right? Which then allows them to say, look, we want to build and deploy AI solutions, right? And mature
mhm,
our solutions, on your platform. So it's how do we help our customers modernize where they don't feel like their business is at risk or their business will be disrupted. And so we're not just like pitching the cloud or pitching AI or pitching a solution. It's really about like how are we helping customers engineer outcomes and helping them do that by deploying with excellence, deploying at scale, deploying the right governance from day one, ensuring that they have the right level of resiliency. But then I think at the same time, as I mentioned, like the business side of it is super important. Like, what is the impact? So, how are we having a conversation with a customer and saying, you're going to do all these things and we're going to guide you to do all these things? But
mhm,
how do we ensure that we understand like what their top line goals are and how are we aligning their tech investments that they're making to actual growth or to actual competitive advantage, and how are we helping their teams become more productive, and is their operations more agile? And so I really do think that customer success teams like they operate in this like, I guess I would say like a dual lens engine. It's like part architect, part strategist, part all in on the customer. And I think that's really the superpower. And I mean, that's why like I just love like what I do and the beauty and the magic that I get to bring to customers. We've been actually recently working on helping our customers accelerate their journey to the cloud. And one of the examples that my team has been driving with a significant level of intensity is our Azure Accelerate program, where we actually bring customer success expertise through this delivery mechanism called the Cloud Accelerate Factory, where we created it for customers, honestly, who made a commitment to Azure. And now we actually want to help them transition seamlessly. So, to that point that I said, is like, yes, we sold them the technology, they committed to their technology, but how do we make sure that they get there with ease? So, we're embedding hands-on keyboard engineers. We're bringing best practices that we've learned from thousands of customers. We're aligning end-to-end platform skills, right? All under this umbrella of get the customer to value faster without them becoming overwhelmed. Then I tell my team like exclamation point, right? Value faster, but like let's not overwhelm the customer. And
mhm,
I think that is so important because at the end of the day, right, it's
mhm.
not success if the tech works, but the business outcome doesn't move and progress.
Totally. I wonder, so for, I guess, like to, in your mind, how do you define the customer success? How do you evaluate if you achieved your goal? Would it be, obviously people would have like the business benchmarks, but I guess like, how do you kind of translate that into day to day? You mentioned like a few things that I find really interesting. One is like, making sure that like, you don't overwhelm the client and you basically also understand their goal and then their um top of lines to like make sure that you kind of help them leveraging the product to achieve that kind of results. And I guess like how do you formulate that into like a day-to-day work? And so I'm sure like there's a lot of people working on your team, then how do you kind of like measure different component of like the teams to make sure that like, people also work together to achieve the same goal?
Yeah, no, that's That's a really good question. I think there's multiple pieces to this, right? And that's why,
Mhm,
I use this word empathy up front, because I really
mhm,
think customer success, like, surely it's about numbers, and
mhm,
success shows up in numbers, whether that's revenue, consumption, usage, adoption. And typically that's what you hear, right, from customer success, because it's all about, is the customer getting value? And typically that value is measured by, are they adopting it? Ultimately, if they're adapting it, then there's usage metrics, there's consumption metrics that will align to that. But you know, I look at, that's one way, and we have lots of metrics, and most companies do that align to that.
mhm,
But I also say to my team that the best customer success isn't measured just in usage, it's measured in transformation. Like when
mhm,
our customers like tell us, wow, we could not have done this without you. Like, to me, that's a signal. That's a KPI of success, because then we know we're not just a vendor, we're a partner. And that's super important, because, while success has to show up in the numbers, it also has to show up in the trust we build. And like for me, that is very important, because I think if you build trust, you know, that's where you can do so much for your customers in helping them really transform, their business, their operations, for their stakeholders, for their customers, for their employees. So I really believe that trust is a real currency of any customer success organization. And
mhm,
I think, it's funny. I often say to my customer success team, like, we are a special forces unit, right?
mhm,
Like, we bring speed, we bring clarity, we bring purpose, right? Because we've got to align around the outcomes that matter, and not our outcomes, the
mhm,
outcomes that matter for the customer. So it can't just be about adoption metrics and usage metric. It has to be about, how do we ensure that we drive with speed, we drive with clarity, we drive with expertise, where we are investing in real business transformation. That means we're co-creating with the client, we're embedding our skill sets, like I mentioned, with our, Azure Accelerate, Cloud Accelerate Factory, initiative.
mhm,
How are we ensuring that we're not just saying, okay, you signed up for our platform, you signed up for our services, thank you very much, use our platform, good luck,
mhm,
right? Like, that's not what we want, right? Our goal,
mhm.
again, is to get the customers to drive value faster, ensuring that they're not overwhelmed, and really bring in the best. And I think, you know in my customer success team, I really strive this notion of, like, how do we bring best practices, right? I mean, we're deploying and we're driving initiatives across thousands of clients across the globe. I want to make sure every one of my customers that sign up to be able to, to run their business and run their mission critical operations on Azure, know that, when our team shows up, like, we're not just bringing expertise, but we're bringing the best of the
Mhm,
expertise, and we're bringing learnings across, their industry, learnings across solutions, so that, again, they can get to value much faster for their customer base. So you can only do that when there is trust.
mhm,
So I think it's got to be empathetic in terms of the mindset.
mhm.
We want adoption, but we got to do it in a way where trust is built, trust is earned, we execute, with that. Because again, I'll just reinforce that I think that is the real currency of success.
For sure. I wonder, like, since I have so many questions on that, since like I feel like a lot of our listeners, we have listeners who are both working at the big tech company, but also from the startup space or the VC space. Let's say when I feel like a lot of the startup founders that they are their own customer success. How would you advise them to quickly build trust? And then also you mentioned about sharing industry expertise and then making sure that they kind of, I wouldn't say have the quick win, but like immediately feeling that you are on the same page with them, providing them with expertise and advice. I guess like what would be three things that you would prepare as a startup founder? You're your own customer. success? Like, how do you kind of like, after a client purchase your product once, how do you kind of like maintain the relationship going forward? Do you just take the customer to lunch every month, or how do you kind of like actually formulate a program to like help you establish the longer term trust and relationship?
Yeah. I run a global team, so I don't think I can take all my
Yeah.
customers to lunch every month, as I would never be at home. And I live in North Carolina, and I love North Carolina and the outdoors. But no, look, here's what I would say. I think the best approach to customer success is figuring out, how do you make yourself indispensable without making it about your product or your service? I think like that's a key point. I think a lot of times when we think about customer success is, again, it's about the adoption metric or the usage metric or the
Mhm.
consumption metric, whatever vernacular we want to use within our companies. But I actually think it's like, does the customer see you as a product or a service, or they see that you are helping them drive a level of transformation that they would have not been able to achieve without you? And so it's about that, I think, that customer's aha moment, right? Where you take the friction off the plate, you bring expertise to the table, and they in return, they say, wow, you've seen things, Rashida, your team has seen things like we didn't even think about. You asked us questions, you probed
Mhm.
in areas that we didn't even think to ask about. And to me, like, that's what every customer success organization should be anchored on. Because
Mhm.
I think when you're anchored on that, I think that's when, again, the currency of trust is built. It's not about use my product or use my service. You're really embedded within that organization in driving interaction. And I think, in a lot of our engagements where this works really well, what we see, it's actually not about like what the customer maybe initially signed up for, right?
Mhm.
When we built that trust, we learned so much about that customer's operation. We're an extension of their technical teams. We're extension of their business process, and we're actually able to then inform them on what's next, right? What they should do, what they should consider, what good looks like. And it becomes a consistent, ongoing conversation where it's a always on dialogue versus a dialogue for just in that moment for that product and that service. And so I really do like, my teams to, how do we be evergreen,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
As the customer is going forward on any transformation. And even if they're considering other products or the
Mhm.
services that are not even first party to us, is the trust there for them to listen to our perspective, for us to provide them, with thoughts of what they should consider as they make decisions for ultimately so that they can achieve their strategic imperatives.
Wow, I really love that. I feel like I have a piggyback question on this too. So,
Okay.
not everyone will be a perfect customer, right? So, like, I mean, a lot of the customer may be more demanding than others, or like, they may have other requirements that you couldn't accomplish. So how do you deal with at a situation that like when people have extra requests that like demands a lot of stuff, or just uh, basically dealing with a challenge situation.
Look, I think that's part of the business, right? That's that's
Mhm,
that's why we're here. Is no, every conversation will not be easy. There will be hurdles. One of the things I lead with, and I learned this, being in delivery, because I always say
mhm,
like I'm first and foremost a services delivery person, because I
mhm,
think like it's the ultimate role of how you build trust, but how you also make magic with your customer. And I think that's part is, the part of it is like being honest, like with the
mhm,
customer. What can our technology do well? Where are maybe the gaps, maybe things that we're working on, in our roadmap. And I think that if we are back to this point about trust, this is why trust is so important as an anchor, and I keep saying it's the real currency. When our customers see that we're doing that, and it's not about, the revenue that we want to attain or the product that we want to sell, like, even if though they may not accept it in that moment, my experience has been a year from now, 2 years from now, they'll remember the conversation they had with my team. They'll remember the conversation that we had with me, right? They may not be vulnerable to say, oh, Rashida and the team told us so, but they'll know that we were honest, right? And I think that is super important. And so, I think that, one of the things I guide my teams on is, let's make sure that we're leading with trust. Let's make sure that we're leading with honesty. Let's ensure that we're leading with clarity in the customer conversation. And let's make sure that we're proposing things and guiding the customer with things that are best for them, not best for us.
Oh, I'm writing this down. Best for them.
And that's hard to do sometimes,
very hard
right?
to do. Yes.
But I think you build, I think you garner respect, and you really, ensure that your clients understand that, again, this is not about a usage metric. Like, we are really here to drive transformation. We are a part of that transformation. And like I said, like, those conversations are not always going to be, peachy, and beautiful. Sometimes, eggs are going to be thrown, at us in the well, that's okay, right? I think is making sure that we understand, what those challenges are, because I think even when customers, we have difficult conversations with customers, like, there's a reason why, right? They are asking the questions that they're asking. So I think if we step back and understand the intent and where they want to go, it may not necessarily be the answer for today, but it could be the answer for tomorrow, and that's also okay.
For sure. I feel like customer success is a role that actually everybody plays at any stage in life. So, for example, let's say a startup founder, obviously they have the investor that's a customer service target, as well as like they have like their actual clients. And then, as well as like, for example, if you work in tech, then you have your own boss that's also your client, or your actual company is your client as well. So in a way, everybody is your own customer success. And you mentioned that make yourself indispensable. I actually felt like that's such a great way to frame it. And then I think number one is like, how do you identify what would be the core things that you need to do to make yourself indispensable? Like, obviously, I think for work, it's obviously your own work. Like, making sure, I guess, like when people use Azure, when people use other like Microsoft product, you need to be able to, answer how to use it, all that kind of stuff. But I guess, how do you think about to going a step ahead to make yourself indispensable? Like, what are other, I guess, like services or like understanding that you have to do to kind of like shape you into like a function that's, more, I guess, reliable, as well as like trusted by the customer? I guess, how do you quickly understand what need to be done to for your core job, as well as like what need to be done to make yourself indispensable?
Well, look, I think this concept of like, this dual lens engine, right? Where part architect or part expertise, but also like, what are your consulting and sort of strategist skills? And how do you weave that into the customer's objective, the customer's intent, and their growth plans? I sometimes say like, to our teams, like, as a customer success team, like, we got to be able to talk about technical topics and APIs and EBITDA in the same sentence, right? Because that shows that we're bringing the hands-on expertise, we're bringing best practices, but we also understand what it takes for a client to achieve their top line goals, right? We understand, like, they've made an investment in tech, but that investment in tech is not just to make an investment in tech, but to drive growth, to improve margin, to drive a competitive advantage. to improve productivity, to drive agility within their operations. And so I think fundamentally it's really about that. It's not just, you know, technical resources.
Mhm.
It's not just someone to say, hey, your renewal is coming up, let's have the commercial conversation. Like, no, again, it's grounded in empathy for the customer, and then bringing skill sets from a technical standpoint to understand, deeply the customer's environment, but also bring in business perspective and bring business groundedness to ensure that that is done with impact.
Totally. I feel like, like you mentioned, basically understanding, be a good listener, understand what's on top of their mind, and then understanding the competitive landscape, like not only just do the part that you need to be doing, but also like having empathy to actually truly see it from their end, from like their business angle. Speaking of see things from their end, I feel like, I feel like we met at the board member conversation, and I feel like you really put things into perspective on, like, you really highlight that the operation uh operate like the active operator are actually very under estimated by people. And then, like, I feel like they make a perfect board member, which I totally agree. You need people in the trenches to really help you understand what you need. And you are on the board of many companies, and why don't we talk about like what have these experiences been like for you, and for people who are whether looking for a board member or trying to be a board member, what's your advice for them?
Yeah, and this has been a journey for me, and I think, like I told you, when we met, and it was so good to meet you. I'm glad that we've reconnected. I do believe that the operator
Mhm,
is a very it's such an important role for a board, but it's so
mhm,
understated, right? And I think
mhm,
boards can really be an enriching experience for operators, but it can
mhm,
also enriching experience and perspective for companies by bringing that experience. And I know for me, serving on boards, I sit on a public board, Regal Rexnord. I sit on a private board, Sonatype, that's a part of Vista Equities portfolio. And then I sit on a nonprofit board as well, Girls Inc., focus on the advancement of, girls, and really teaching them how to be smart and bold, and to really shine and live a life of curiosity. And I have to say, it's been one of the most enriching and humbling parts of my leadership journey.
mhm,
I think that it forces me to sort of lead from a different altitude, um and I think also a humbling altitude as well, right? Because you're not in the day to day, but you're also accountable for how the company steers their long term vision, their growth bets, how they select talent, how they respond to resiliency and in moments of risk. And so I think I think board work,
mhm,
really helps to sharpen your sense of governance and risk, but also, I would say patience, right? Because, you're learning how to ask the right questions,
mhm,
not having all of the answers, to ensure that, you're probing on the strategy, you're probing on how it is being thought about, how it is being executed. You're sort of forcing the conversation around what's the vibe on the ground, right? How do we
mhm,
sort of unlock, whether it's like the product portfolio, the talent, how do we scale the go to market? You're sort of deepening down, like, what is the culture? There are things that needs to be changed. And so I really think that it's a great experience, and really a privilege, I would say, right, to be able
mhm,
to sort of kind of, there's a term like eyes in, hands off, to
mhm,
have that standpoint. And I think also as an operator, it teaches you a level of organizational capability which you don't necessarily learn in your day job, because in your day job, you are fully accountable. So when you're in a position where you're accountable, but you're not the doer,
Mhm.
one, there's a level of anxiety that can bring,
Mhm.
but then learning how to deal with that and learning how to guide and teach and probe others around you, I think it's a very, very powerful leadership skill.
I totally agree. I feel like, um, you said like eyes in, hands off. Like, I feel like, in your day-to-day job, it is like, you have the full control on where you're gonna go. But on the other hand, I think being on a board gives you like an extra perspective on like, just from like maybe thinking more strategically than thinking executionally. I feel like I wonder, like, when you are on, since you are on many different boards, from like a robotics company to Girls Inc. to, your LP of like different venture funds and operator collective, and like, um, I wonder, like, what's a main things that people kind of like ask you for, since you're obviously a customer success expert, but since those companies are in very different various industry, from supply chain software to like, robotics to everything else. What is there, like a common pattern that people always need your advice for? And then do you have any general advice that you give to the founders that like, ask you these advice?
Yeah, I think here's what I would say. I think like public boards, private boards, not they all look for different things, right? So I
Mhm.
think and there's also a different rhythm, right? That I think for each one of them that I think helps sharpens your judgment and broadens your perspective. Like when I look at like my public board,
Mhm.
there's a clear focus on governance, shareholder value,
Mhm.
how do we navigate complex market dynamics. And I think in that role, I think it teaches you discipline, how to sort of balance like bold strategic moves with long-term accountability. When I look at like private boards, there's the level of urgency that is required. And I think, it often requires much more of an operational lean in, which I love, right? So I think like in my private board, I get to like roll up my sleeves, a lot more. And I think especially for operators, I think that's where operators can really bring an operator mindset to the table and help think through, scale, go to market pivots.
Mhm.
I think from a nonprofit perspective, for me, I've sort of grounded this on like it's a good reminder of like why leadership matters in the first place. And so I align my nonprofit work really to uh, as a reinforcement of how I can
Mhm.
deepen mission driven work that keeps me grounded, keeps me close to my community, but also sort of helps me continue to shape my leadership and how I show up, right? Like I mentioned, I sit on the Girls Inc. board. That's just really about
Mhm.
how do we help girls, right, early on, to sort of build confidence and build boldness. I sit on the board of visitors of North Carolina State University. I mean, where I got my engineering degrees, and how do I continue to be an influence in that community in terms of how we bring a
Mhm.
rich educational perspective to our students. So I think across all of them,
Mhm.
there's a sort of a strategic clarity that's needed, but there's also a practical perspective and empathy that I think should be grounded in each person. I think for me specifically, as I look at like my public and private boards experience, a lot of times I've been called upon for, I've worked at IBM and I've worked at Microsoft, so two large big tech companies,
Mhm.
different in their own way and different go to markets in their own way. So a lot of times, folks, look at me for like, how do you scale? I have a product, I have product markets fit, I'm ready to scale. What are the channels that I should scale? How should I think about scale? Are there go to market pivots, that I should make?
Mhm.
I get a lot of conversations now around boards given my AI experience, right? Given
Mhm.
I've sort of been in the AI industry now for over a decade. How should we really think about that? What a skill really look like? How do we measure value? How should I think about that? Like within, my product, how do I embed those capabilities in my product? What are customers asking for along that value chain? And so I think each person, based on their experience, brings different skills and different competencies. I always guide people is you don't want to be on a board to check a box or be on the board to just be a board. I think really hone down what are the skill sets and competencies and expertise that you can anchor on, and where you can be, a solid perspective and point of view on helping that company achieve their objectives and move to the next level.
Wow, I totally love that. I feel like, every company is different, like you said, and then for some of them is thinking about like AI solution, or for some of them it's just like I think um strategic clarity, basically just like understanding, giving them basically also a bird's eye view of what you have seen, because you have seen, you work at one of the biggest company in the world, and like you have seen, you have been in a lot of rooms that like most people would never be able to go into, to like actually how people are providing these perspectives on like what are the leaders in the world are kind of like looking at, and then how should you think about your go-to-market strategy, or like where you may fit into, when you are selling to like a big company. But I feel like those are all very, very valuable things that you could provide to people. And since speaking of AI, so how do you incorporate AI into your daily work routine?
Oh my God. I don't think I could ever have a conversation without like some form of this
AI.
question. Um, you know, uh, look, and I worked with Ali Miller, who's
Mhm.
a great influencer in the AI space. Her and I worked together at IBM. I'm so excited. And Ali, if you see this, I'm so proud of you and all you're doing and just shaking up the industry. But she says something to the effect of like, we shouldn't be worried about what AI is going to replace, right? You should be worried
Mhm.
about like really us not embedding AI in everything that we do. So, I really believe that it's not a tool off to the
Mhm.
side. It's a real core part of like my rhythm. Um,
Mhm.
at Microsoft, we're helping customers like reimagine their business models.
Mhm.
And so, for me, I need to make sure that I'm personally using it. I mean, I use co-pilots to draft emails, summarize information. I actually use it to prep for my board meetings. Prep for customer meetings. I've been using it lately to even refine, messages, for my team. I have a large organization, across the globe, multiple cultures and different perspectives, so I've been also playing around with it there to ensure that there's empathy in terms of how I approach, my team and also customers within those regions. One feature I love is this researcher tool that's in Copilot, because it sort of lets me like deep dive and explore a topic. Like it pulls together like source materials from everywhere. It's like and it pulls it all together. It's like kind of like having like growing up, I had the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Mhm.
So it's like having like a live Encyclopedia Britannica and analyst on standby, right? Who sort of understands context and gets straight to the point. And I really love it. I've been playing with it and learning how to use it even more. And it was actually super interesting because, just the other day, we were discussing an idea, and one of the team members, they quietly pulled up researcher,
Mhm.
and they like generated this like full how to execute plan in seconds, right? It was
Mhm.
super impressive. And it was interesting. Like I saw how it immediately moved the conversation forward, number one, which I think is good. And that's what we all want AI
Mhm.
to do, right? It needs to, I like to say it shortens the distance between ideas and action.
Mhm.
Um, but I think like what was super interesting for me is that I felt like it raised the bar, right?
Mhm.
I think it sort of kind of, forced other members on the team to see like, oh, wow, like wait, how did they do that? Right. And then the person was like, I just use Copilot. And
Mhm.
so I think, for me, even me using it and sharing how I'm using it with my team, I really view it as an uplift to performance overall for our organization in terms of how we can drive clarity, how we can drive execution, how we can drive insight. Like I do believe in this notion that AI does help me to work smarter, like, which is great. It's like I feel like I have an extra brain that does not get tired, because right now it's Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern and I'm a little bit exhausted from the week. But I also, truly believe, and I talked about this when I gave the commencement speech at NC State last December. While I'm super excited about technology and I'm super excited about AI, I believe very deeply that it will never replace the power of the human spirit, right? There is no technology more positively disruptive than the force of our humanity. And so I believe that AI can enhance our work. It enhances my work. I use it, every day. And look, to be very honest, yes, I wear a Microsoft badge, and of course I'm a Copilot user, but I also look at competitor technology, as well. And I use, other technologies as well to see, like, what is it doing? What results am I going to get? I think it makes me a better leader, right? Back to the point on, we talked about earlier about customer success, right? How do you look left and right? How do you have depth? How do you have breadth? And so, for me, I really want to integrate it in, everything, that I do and how I show up, so that I can be more instinctive, I can be more empathetic, I can be more creative, I can shorten the time it takes me to prepare, for something. But also, as much as I want to lean into that, I really also want to say, like I don't think it will ever replace human spirit. And I think that's the beauty of us as humans and as a society. And that's really important to me.
Wow, I totally love that. And I want to be mindful of time. Maybe we do one real question and then a quick 1 minute fire run.
Okay.
Uh, I wonder, so like, what motivates you to become a very successful person? Because, obviously we talk a lot about like your beginning to like where you are now. I guess like what motivates you day to day to be a very successful person?
That's an interesting question. So here's what I would say. I grew up with very humble beginnings. My grandmother, I don't know what education she had, but I don't know, it wasn't more than a high school education, even though I thought she had a PhD. Um, and so, but she had standards, she had a vision, and that legacy really stays with me. And so one of my critical drivers is that my initial circumstance of just how I came into this world, if you will, is not what society would say is great. And, so for me, initially, very early on, I accomplished things to prove to society that I was worthy, to prove to society that I was enough. But I've really shifted that, right? Because I want to be able to use what I've been able to accomplish to inspire others, for everyone to know that it is not where you start, but it is where you finish. And all of us is going to have different forms of beginnings and pedigrees and education. And it doesn't matter, but your hustle and your grind is ultimately what matters. And for me, that is motivating, because quite frankly, I could have never dreamed up the career I've had. So I'm super grateful, for it. But I'm also grateful for the family that I have, right? Which is my second motivator, right? Because the family that I have, they love me. They don't love the title I have at Microsoft. They don't love my resume. They don't love the LinkedIn version of me. They just love me. And that kind of grounding for me is everything, because I think it keeps me moving with purpose, not with ego. And for me, that's what's important. That's what drives me. Like, my drive is, to move with purpose, to be able to open the door for others that have had my journey, to be able to experience and maneuver life in a totally different way. And so being able to move with purpose is my motivator. And really, my family and my friends are the real MVPs,
Mhm.
of my life, because they help me to lead with purpose and not just pace.
Mm. Wow, I totally love that. Okay, so quick fire round. What's your favorite book?
Oh, my favorite book. Look, I'm a Simon Sinek fan,
Mhm.
and I actually read every day. He has a small book called "Together Is Better," and it's just like different quotes and different sayings, and I think it's just a good guide, for me. So it's one of the favorites on my bookshelf here, and I
Mhm.
have like 2 copies, and I look at it literally every single day.
Love that. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Oh my gosh, who would I invite to my dinner party? Wow, that is really tough.
Mm.
Wow, who would I invite to my dinner party? I don't know, Beyonce.
Oh. Invite me too.
I haven't made it to her concert recently, the last 2 that she's had, so I'll just invite her to my dinner party, and then she can have a concert for
Casually.
me.
Yes, love that. What's one skill you're constantly trying to get better at?
Uh, I think the skill I'm constantly trying to get better at is just having balance in life, like learning how to pace myself throughout life. I think that, you know, this environment that we're in, it's all about the next thing. And how do we just stay rooted, while we rise and be balanced.
Mm, uh, love that. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Oh, that's tough. There's a lot of people that made super impactful things in my career. But here's what I would say. I would actually say my mother, right?
Mhm.
Because I think my mother taught me that nothing is given, it is earned. That
Wow, that's so
you
deep.
you have to hustle, you have to grind. And while she's not a corporate VP and she's not a CEO, she really taught me how to lead with intention and how to lead with respect. And I think like those are the fundamentals that will allow you to succeed regardless of the badge you wear or the title you have.
Wow. Okay, that's such a great lesson. Nothing is given, it's earned. Where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work, I love my Peloton. I ride it frequently outdoors. I love to hike. I love to walk, especially this time of year. I try to walk at least 20 to 30 miles a day. So you'll catch me outside. You'll catch me on the beach. My parents still live in St. Thomas. And so I try to make it down and enjoy the beautiful Caribbean Sea as much as I can.
Wow, I love that. Well, also quite quickly saying hi, Peter. So quickly saying to the audience who come in, but hi, Rashida. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a wonderful conversation. You are such an icon, and I really look up to you. And super excited for seeing you again, IRL.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. You are awesome. You are the icon, not me.
No,
I'm on your
no,
show.
no, 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 no. I'm just like I have so much respect for what you have, done for yourself, and then you really carve out your own path, and then just I I feel like you're killing it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me quickly end stream.